Well, I'm really excited to welcome Ginni Rometty, who former CEO of IBM and rock star member of the Technology CEO Council, who I love my opportunities to work with, to our virtual weird Wayne's World meets Meet the Press series to talk about her fantastic new book, Good Power. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for reading it, Bruce.
I told you I didn't read it. You read it to me. I listened to it, which was even better because I had a chance to get to know you. You're on this awesome whirlwind book tour. And as I'd mentioned to you, it's surprising to me how many people who are friends said, thanks for inviting me, but I already heard or I've signed up to hear somewhere else. As with everything you've done in your life per the book and per my interaction, if you're going to do it, you may as well do it 10,000%. So it's going real well. I'd love to jump right in, ask you some questions from the reading of it. You know, when the very first anecdote and a foundation, I think, of your life clearly is when you were 16, your father abandoned your mom, who did not have a job, and you and your three siblings, you know, which is brutal and certainly does devastate. Things like that devastate so many families. And yet, you know, as you relate not only on your story, but all three of your siblings, everybody is a total superstar and went on to incredibly successful things. That's amazing grit and resilience. And something I often wonder about is there was nothing, it's not like somebody showed up and gave you grit or resilience. Is that something people you think are born with? Is it something you develop based upon other circumstances? You know, why did you and your siblings thrive in such a difficult start and others crumble?
So to Bruce's point, I do start this book on a very personal story, which most people even find that be sort of very surprising. And that's something I never really talked much about. But I do it for a reason, not to make someone feel sorry for us or be a victim or anything like that. I start on the story of my dad abandoning us. And actually, I happened to walk into the garage and I overhear him tell my mother, I don't care whatever happens to you. I don't care what happens to the kids. You can go work on the street. And he would then leave us without a home, money, food, everything. And my mom had never gone to college. And she, you know, when I was born, she was a kid having a kid. And she was 34 at the time with 4 children. And so I start there, and I'll directly answer Bruce's question. My mom, I never saw her cry. She was just so determined, though, even though she had no education, that this story shouldn't end this way. So we would just observe it. And you know, it did a couple things for me, and some of you may have, and I wish we could take a poll. I could see everyone, a poll on this. First, it made us fiercely independent because we all watched this and said, well, man, I could never depend on someone else in my life. I got to be able to take care of myself. And 3 of us are women, girls at the time. Say, well, you can never rely on someone. That was a big mistake my mom made. And then the other thing, I also speak of both my grandma and great grandma would suffer horrible tragedies, horrible, yet would find a way through them. So to answer Bruce's question, I start there, and do I think it is nature or nurture? I think you have to you have to go through some kind of adversity. I don't think it has to be as traumatic as what I did, or maybe some of you did. I've had this conversation with Brene Brown, Bruce, about, you know, do people, to get to this, if I took a poll, how many people think to get where they got, they had to have suffered some tragedy or some adversity? Her view is it has to be some kind of adversity for most people to get that kind of grit. And I always say, for me, it set a bar for bad. And after that, nothing else ever appeared bad to me. And it's, you know, it's like, I've seen bad. I don't care what they do to me in any circumstance. If I have my husband, my health, my family, nothing's bad. So I start as a tribute to my mom, because I would say mom, grandma, great grandma taught us that hard work always makes a difference. And I know people don't always believe that anymore, but it was hard work will make something better. My mom taught us never let someone define you. And then the silver thread that Bruce will probably picked up in the book was, like, my mom wasn't dumb, but she had no access to education. So this idea that access and aptitude, and that's how Bruce and I got to know each other well, was all this work on skills first, hiring people for skills, not a college degree. And even though I vice chair at a university, by the way, but it doesn't mean we can come back to that topic. So I think it is a bit of, you have to have experienced something. So I don't think it's just nature, right? I think it's a bit of that nurture of what happens. I don't know, Bruce, what do you think? And your mom and dad are listening. So
Yeah, and as I
got
know,
great parents.
I'm blessed that I kind of come from Leave It to Beaver background where I can't remember any adversity ever growing up. I mean, they had to listen to me practice the trumpet, so that was adversity for them. But it's the good news, I feel like, is that for me at least led to a very strong emotional grounding. I'm good there, but life didn't challenge me, and I'm lucky that it didn't. It allowed me to kind of be lazy until I was less lazy. By the way, another hero, and again, the first couple of chapters are so amazing, in part because I knew you as a master of the universe and not kind of this adversity growing up, but your father's brother, your uncle, who basically said, I'm going to do what's right, not what my knucklehead brother, Uncle Sam, is it? Or it's
my Uncle Charlie. Yeah.
Uncle Charlie. He's one of my heroes in the book.
Yeah.
So let me back you up, because I jumped into a kind of a philosophical question, but the book's called Good Power. I've read it. A lot of people here are going to read it because, as always,
because they get no choice, you're giving it to them.
Well, we're going to send everybody a link. You'll enter your mailing address, and then the publishing people will mail it. Thank God we don't have to put it in the mail, but it's a wonderful read. But if you don't mind, just a couple, I'm sure you've answered this one before. Explain what is good power, and then also, is good power as a concept something that, as you were thinking about the story of your life, you realized that is a framing mechanism, or years into your job, or 10 years ago, did it come up?
Look, you got a lot of I know I'm looking around, really accomplished people listening, so us talking among friends here. This is all retrospective. And I always say revisionist history is absolutely perfect. Okay. So and I'm very clear about that in the book, and we'll probably talk about why write a book, because I had never intended to write a book. And so once I got into it, then it was, well, look, I only want to write it if I can give people tips and ideas. Didn't always work out, but things that I thought were germane in this moment of time. So the idea of Good Power, which we backed into, was how to do really hard things, but do them in a good way. And by good way, it meant you should be able to embrace people with differing opinions, yet still make progress if you don't hunt for perfection. And so, because that's very polarizing, and you should be able to do it with respect. And that's kind of what I learned from lots of other people that I would hope to do. And so it is all about that concept. And I was actually in the middle section, because it's written in the power of me. So what do you individually learn? The power of we, when you start to care about somebody else, and the power of us. Please don't give up on making societal change, because I think all of us can do that, and anybody can do it. If you don't get so fixated on polarization. So I felt like the moment was right for this, about such a divided world out there, and that I hope what I convey to some people is, here's a set of reasonable tools that you can make an actual difference. Now, the only way to do that and have it be, as I learned through a horrible process, is that people are not interested in me telling them my opinion. I have to show it, which means, this is why it took me 2 years to write a book, because they're like, okay, yeah, this is all interesting and very boring. And I'm like, well, then let's not do it. They're like, no, tell us, how did you feel? I'm like, are you serious? What were you thinking? Where did these decisions come from? And so begins this journey of introspection. That is why the book ended up in an entirely different place than where I started, because I really wanted to write about tips about leadership in these times. And I really wanted to write about that idea of skills over degrees. That was really what I wanted, with lots of good academic data in it. And they convinced me that that might be good, but no one would ever read it. And I had to go this other way. So it was how it ends up with a memoir with purpose. So it's not everything you need to know. So that's great. It's the things that would be useful is what I tried to do.
Well, by the way, I'll disagree with, I figured it was just more setting up the sequel, but I think you, and maybe you pick an Adam Grant or somebody, but I think it'd be great to write about skills first and the learning and where things are going. Admittedly, it doesn't marry well with your personal life journey, as other than the degree to which you focused on this. When you thought about writing your book, was there anybody who had written a similar business leadership autobiography that you thought, that's kind of my model?
I thought that I'd be interested in other people's views. I thought Condi had some, how she'd written. I saw some I didn't like, because it was just like, hey, here's a story of how great I am. And I'm certainly not great. So I didn't feel that way. And I think if you ever listen to it or read it, it's not about that at all. And as people kept saying, people only learn from your mistakes, not your glory of things you did right. So it took me to a very vulnerable place. So there weren't many. And even the publisher at some point was first like, well, wait, this either needs to be academic or pure memoir, where they really struggled. And even when I end up with this memoir of purpose, I say to myself, ooh, sometimes it's good to be different and sometimes it's not good to be different, like to be a thing in the middle, a compromise. But so far it appears to have struck a chord. I was telling Bruce, I was filming Fareed Zakaria this morning, and Fareed was like, what, he interviews a lot of people on their books like Bruce does. And he's like, what makes a difference is the personal side, actually, and so I kind of feel like had I not aired over there, nobody be reading this book right now. So, but Bruce, anybody here wants to write a book. I mean, if I knew what I knew today, would I know that I would not do it?
So actually, I want to ask you about that. I almost want to call BS on that. I understand it was way harder than you probably appreciated, although I was telling Ginni before this, the book's so well constructed that it reads so smoothly that the first instinct is, well, this sounds like it was pretty easy to write because it flows so well. And I understand that that's because, the finished product
written 3 times. Yeah.
Right. But that aside, I hope it's not true that you wouldn't do it again. I mean, you're getting it. It's getting out. It's getting great acclaim. I think there's a lot of folks who are going to take away really important lessons. So I think it's a valuable contribution. When you, so there's both what you learned that, boy, writing a book's a lot harder, and it wasn't the book you thought it would be. But separate and apart from that, do you feel like you learned anything about yourself or your own life that you never appreciated until this effort?
Yeah. So for anybody here thinking of it, I do think when you're forced into that deep of a retrospective, like most of us are always doing something, and don't really look back too often, other than to learn lessons. I was a big lesson learner. To me, it's very clear in my post-retirement now, like why I do what I do. And those who know me, that worked with me and knew me well, said, boy, while I didn't know all the personal part, now that I've read it, a lot of things click as to why you do how you always were, why you were. And it is this biggest silver thread about access and aptitude, and about education and skills and how people learn. And Bruce, I mean, some of you know, maybe a couple of you know what I am working on now. It was something I started with Ken Chenault from Amex and Ken Frazier, Charles Phillips, Kevin Shearer from Amgen. And it's called 110, 1 million Black employees over the next 10 years in family sustaining jobs. But it only happens if the companies go look at all their good jobs and rewrite them for skills, because roughly half of them are overinflated to require a college degree to start. And it's kind of the premise that where you start should not determine where you end, which is what my whole life proved in my mom's and my grandma's and in my brothers and my sisters. And so that's the silver thread that it's like really clear. I tortured my sisters to learn all the time, when I had a babysit. I mean, it's like a thread. My whole life was apprenticing. I see the value of apprenticeships. I think they're so underused in this country, but anyways, hopefully we'll talk more about all that, but that's what I learned. There's a silver thread, and I suspect for everybody watching, there is some silver thread. And especially when you go to this, like, I feel like I'm dying when I say this phase of your life, but there's like this time when you just make a decision of another chapter and what to do. And, for me, Lou Gerstner, who I had worked for many years, some of you might remember Lou, kind of the storied leader that led IBM. And when I was getting ready to retire, Lou would say, come see me, and I get to give you your counseling on retirement. And the first time I went, and I gave him this long litany of things that people were suggesting I might do. And he says, well, okay, you get a big F in this conversation. This lesson is F. And he's like, after the whole life like this, you have to go back and think about, what you've accumulated, like what should be at the center of a bullseye. And then, he did put my husband at the second ring, not the first ring. Okay. My husband would like to be at the center, but, that, and then there'll be a few other things. And I eventually got an A+, by the way, but it took a while. And, but that thought I think particularly kind of hangs together on, when you write a book and why. So anyways, back to
Look,
you.
I
Sorry, I rambled
enjoyed
off. I told Bruce I wouldn't ramble. Go ahead.
I enjoyed it. I hope others did too. I actually never read Gerstner's Who Said Elephants Can't Dance or Welch. Um, I had in mind a little bit of one of the all-time greats is Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, which I think is becoming a movie now, which is cool. And I love Michael Dell.
That's an unbelievable story, right?
That's so that one and Michael Dell, the most recent book he wrote, which what I liked, it was like Godfather 2. It would toggle between his early days and then kind of the modern days. And the early days and Phil Knight's book, startup stuff has kind of energy. Yours reminded me a bit of Ursula Burns's book, where neither of you started the company, but you both led it through really similar challenging times.
Yeah.
And you both came from pretty hard backgrounds.
That's true.
She was nice enough to do one of these talks with us too, although it was before her book. So within your career, it seems like going into this, I knew you had two things going for you, and the book convinced me of a third thing. So number one, I know you're really smart. A lot of that's genetic. Good luck, because your siblings are clearly really bright too. Your mom's really bright. So, okay, good genetics. Sometimes you win the lottery, sometimes you lose. Number two, you work harder than anybody I've ever met. That is a choice, although it's a sacrifice because you give up lots and lots and lots of other things to choose that. But number three, I didn't necessarily know, but I thought you did a really nice job of highlighting all of the great mentors you had. And something I wonder, what the book didn't make clear is whether you went seeking out mentors or they spotted you as a rising talent. And for a lot of people, mid-career or even early career, do you wait by the phone? Is a mentor going to find you? If you're a leader right now, do you have to I'm going to find 5 people to mentor? How does that sort of relationship happen? Because yours were unbelievably valuable advocates for you who helped your rise, but I didn't know how the connections began.
Yeah. So again, I'm looking around, very accomplished people here. So everyone's got their view on this topic. I have a view slightly different. I did happen to do Adam Grant last night, and I have a different view than some of the people I've heard him interview. You do find each other, and I never thought about one, and I never ever called them like, you're my mentor. Like I heard someone say, the mentor should be the person you could tell everything to. And I'm thinking to myself, that might only be my husband and my general counsel because he's bound by law. Okay. And even then, be careful. And so I was like, okay, that was never what to me. And I also felt the reason I pay so much tribute to these people, like I am a mosaic of them, and I am because of their generosity of caring. And so I always say to people, to me, mentors are anyone that you will learn from. And if you show someone you'll learn from them, whether they use the word doesn't ever matter. They, in effect, will be your mentor, because if you actually speak to someone with an idea of learning from them, people can tell the difference, when you're just speaking at them or trying to tell them something versus you're actually listening to learn something. And I always viewed relationships as what could I give before what could I get. From very beginning, someone told me that very, very, very early in my career, said, if anyone ever asks you for help, you give it and never expect something in return. And that if you live a life that way, again, it's trust, it's naive. Maybe some would say it's naive. In the whole, it comes back to you. That this is never transactional. Never look at these moments as in the moment transactional. So my point was on mentors, I would just look at everyone like, okay, what did I really like? And I was constant about that, and listening carefully, asking good questions, and that listen to learn. I think so many people do not listen to learn. I can't stand it when I'm going to be at a cocktail party tonight. And when someone's talking to you, and you can tell they're actually looking over your shoulder, looking for someone more interesting to be coming along. And I'm like, okay, they're not even hearing a word, and I'm trying to listen to that. So that listening to learn, be in the moment, and everyone you can learn from, then you get adopted by lots of people. And I feel like that's what happened to me, Bruce. I got adopted. I didn't put myself up for adoption, but that engenders that between people.
Hey, you're 5'9". It's harder to look over your shoulder. I'm 5'6".
I know. I have that benefit.
My
I do have that benefit. Yeah.
Hey, so therefore, when you become a senior exec and a CEO, did you have in your mind, I'm going to be looking to adopt people, or does it happen just organically?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because honestly, I didn't do a good enough job about that early on in my life. And a little bit of it was because I was planning to help Plenty and Adopt and teach that. From that sense, yes, I was kind of like always teaching. But this idea of like being a role model to help people, that would come to me later in life, because originally some of us I'm looking at, a few women in the audience, I think again, I'm a product of the 70s and 80s. I would be like, please do not mention I'm a woman. Please do not go there. Recognize me for what I do. Do not go down that path. And at some point, I can remember still to this day, the experience I give what I think is like this fantastic financial services presentation. A man comes up to me and says, I wish my daughter could have seen. I'm thinking he's going to ask me something about my brilliant points. And in the moment I can remember it because it felt very watershed to me, that I would start to say, hey, this isn't really about me, that people can't be what they can't see. And I had better start acting like a role model and not be so selfish about this topic. So a little bit related, it's more related to your question of when did and I think after that, then I played a far more active role in my life on that topic.
So it's as both for myself and for others, it's something you kind of know you should do, or that the best people do, and then how you set about that goal and turning it into a reality is difficult. But let me turn to some other topics. You and I got to know each other when you, on behalf of IBM, would come to Washington, where you may have noticed there's a lot of partisan fighting. It's kind of what's done. But I feel like both what we got to work on and what you independently did demonstrated a whole lot of good things can get done by people who are patient, persistent, bipartisan. Put your head down, don't worry about the credit, and don't worry about being on cable or whatnot. Interestingly, the most bipartisan issue in Washington right now is concern about China, and the belief that the constructive engagement, which was the so-called Washington Consensus, the policy from at least 2000, and roughly when China joined the World Trade Organization, till kind of the end of your time at IBM, that generally the thought is that failed. And maybe it failed because we didn't worry about people who were left behind, or maybe it failed because President Xi took China a different direction. You were on the very front lines. IBM is one of the most global. Sam wrote that piece, The Globally Integrated Enterprise, that I thought was so brilliant when I read it. It kind of feels like those days are a little over. And I'm interested, as somebody who was so front row, the state of U.S.-China relations. Where are we now and where are we going?
No, so I'm either going to make a lot of friends or enemies. I don't know. And this is how I would get to know Hank Paulson very well, by the way, on a lot of this topic. And because we were one of the very first multinationals there. So like some of you, maybe I can't even tell you how many times I have been to China. 50, I don't know, countless. And I always say to people, nothing is as it appears, and there's no coincidences in China. When we landed, if the plane had a good parking spot, there was a reason. If you didn't, there was a reason. It didn't matter what it was. And I'll tell you where I was and where I am on this, Bruce, because I was a big believer that, look, the way to work with China back then was, I believe strongly in free trade. The best thing is to be the best innovator at what you do. I did believe you serve at their behest as a commercial company. If you have a license to live there, as long as you can do something they can't do, and keep going and just keep rising the bar about what it is that you do. I would even, and this is Bruce and I were talking a moment ago about the point about chips wars. You were talking about how you would interview the chip war person, and which I'm in that book, and for a reason. I even really believe the best way to keep world peace is this idea, this interrelated trade, and even for the financial systems. And IBM made the systems that still run their banks today. And that we would be better off, because it's the number one import to China, to let them make chips of not the kind that can run AI, so like above 14 nanometer, okay, not the super chips below, and to try to help them do that. Now, they failed miserably at that. We can come back to all of this. But when she entered the picture, like a couple of dynamics just all happened at once. I felt that she coming in, and I will vividly remember being in a very small meeting with his group of seven, one of the seven, and being lectured. And I was like, oh, this is the first time I'm like being lectured on how bad we are. And I'm thinking, we're not bad, but it was so like a moment check. times are going to change, and they do start to change, right? With how he views things. And then I fought so hard for TPP because I really believed the best way to keep China in check is this multilateral viewpoint of everybody staying together, band together. As you know, then that goes to the wayside. And then certainly President Trump had a view about bilateral versus multilateral, which I still think multi when you're dealing with this kind of thing. So it would over time in my book now become less of a win-win, very much less of an ability to have a win-win with China, which is where I think we're at now. And, I think we're in a position now where you would, on one hand, strongly have to protect your IP, but I could come back to a thought about that. Second is fiercely compete. And thirdly is, I still think we should cooperate on things like the environment and things that we could find common ground on that, there's, you just, if you leave it in an isolated position, I'm one of the ones that doesn't believe that is the right thing to do. And that back to exactly listening to learn, where you will get with this. So where we're headed right now is not a very good place for me, right? I think it's a horrible place. And I feel some of those activities that transpired accelerated something that was maybe inevitable with Xi in power to happen sooner, right? And that we could have at least, in a lot of ways, they may have been pushed out a bit. I hope I never see the issue with Taiwan in my life, but I don't know that it's inevitable. And, it would be a race that can we build chips in other places faster? And I don't know that we can beat that in time. And I saw a really interesting article. You guys are in Washington, and I don't always read every one of them, but it was in U.S. Affairs on, it was just last week, I think, but it was saying, hey, before all of you think that the way they've, gotten some prowess is because they are so good at stealing, be careful. What has grown, and I think this is a really good point, is their process expertise. In that the example was an iPhone had 5% value add to the Chinese, now it's 25% value add. So, and this is true why it's so hard to move out of China. They built these ecosystems of pretty high sophisticated parts that can go into things. And so we could do a whole thing on China. So where do I think it's headed was your question. And I hope we can stop it from a brink. And I think that can only happen if the world, many of our friends, they don't have to be friends you agree with on everything, act together in our positions.
Thanks. And you're right. There's so much to say.
Sorry, I know, and there's better experts here. I'm just like a little measly, commercial guy, but that had a view about this up close.
I'll take issue with measly, but you've been very much front row, and I'm glad that you kind of hold on to the hope that engagement is still a safer, smarter path, but obviously it's being debated. I'm going to turn to a different one, which is, if concern about China is the most bipartisan issue, maybe the least bipartisan issue right now is around ESG and a lot of the conversation, which I didn't know if the title "Good Power." I mean, it's what I love is just like Skills First is actually your mom's story, as well as the story, what you ultimately ended up doing. Good Power could speak to some of your leadership on the bathroom laws when you were the CEO of IBM in Texas and North Carolina, put some unnecessarily confrontational laws in place, or efforts to put laws in place. Some of it is environmental, some of it is social, but the ESG movement has grown. It was during your leadership. You were along with it on a lot of these issues. Obviously, the murder of George Floyd was sort of the crescendo of it, but we've seen a backlash, and we're seeing a backlash. Governor DeSantis versus Disney was probably the biggest moment of backlash. And I'm interested, with you now much more on the sidelines, do you feel like companies kind of over-rotated and went over their skis into issues where they really don't have expertise? Do you feel like CEOs were and are getting it right, or do you feel like CEOs never did enough and they need to keep pushing to do more? And Alan Murray may be watching, so be careful.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I'm not sure if Alan and I agree or disagree on this topic. I'd be very curious, Bruce, of your view after I answer this. Is that I still stay in touch with many, many of my active friends through a lot of vehicles, and I would say they're not changing what they're doing because of this rhetoric. They change how they talk about it, but beneath, and there's a reason. And it's because most of us do what we did because it was good for our companies as well. And that we live at this intersection of business and society. And I always felt that way. I felt that if you were like, we're 112, 13 years old, if you're going to be that long, society gives you the license to operate. It can revoke the license. I know I've had that discussion with Doug McMillan at Walmart, and that, you know, what happens when you get on the wrong side of society, it can take a long time to come back, and that good companies do the right. I mean, this is like motherhood to me. They do the right thing for employees. They do the right thing for partners, customers, et cetera, communities, and never pleasing everyone. So one of the themes of the book is about tension. Like, you never please you know, these are always about, I always would say, and this is where I say to Alan, and if Alan's listening now, we've had this discussion. So, you know, media, politics, they get to put everything black and white. It was never a world we got to live in. It's never black and white. We always dealt in the gray, always, between all these constituents. And so in the arc of time, you make the right decisions in the long term, right? And so I think it's more important. So I don't really feel a lot of our colleagues did a few, yes. I think the ones that went off the rails might have been the few that hadn't really thought through their own framework about what was important. I know some of my old IBM teams on the phone that, you know, we thought through, look, what we cared about were things that impacted trust people had in us and what we did, things that impacted preparing society to thrive with technology, or things about diversity and inclusion. Not because we thought it was like a wonderful altruistic thing, really deeply rooted belief that we get the best products and best company, best team, best outcome if we get the most diverse, inclusive team. And so I always say, when people talk to me now about DEI, I'm like, look, if you don't authentically believe it, like, this conversation is going to really go nowhere, because then this is like, then you should be on the list, in the poster child list thing of what you're doing. But I always authentically believed it. So, so I don't really care about that stuff. And the reason I picked bathroom bills, Chris Padilla helped me on this, was it was a matter, we were the biggest employer in Texas and North Carolina. And we had people very upset about not being able to feel like they could be themselves at work. And so we couldn't do this on everything. We chose those to make a point. And then again, didn't tweet and blah, blah, which is also what I felt was wrong. Back, Bruce, your point, I really felt the way to get something to happen in Washington or in any state, you know, was a ground war, and go speak to speak to them in terms they understand. And I mean, Chris will remember the conversation with the governor about, you know, sometimes you do have to say, okay, if you do that, I will do this. You might not like that outcome, and draw a line. I did find that unfortunately true in several situations, but we made the point. So I get upset about all that conversation about woke and this and that, because I think most people are focused on this stuff for really good reasons. You know, they believe in it in their company. And I'm sorry that this is another polarizing point for this country, because it should not be. We have so many more important things to work on.
Yeah, so I'll agree. Although I think, you know, you guys did it particularly well, and you're right. Credit Chris Padilla, who has probably read the book. He may or may not. If he hasn't read,
he's in the book. He's in the book.
He's in the book, because in a moment that he probably remembers, he's chopping lettuce for his family dinner when he gets a call from the boss, probably Sunday night. Time to time to slide down the bat pole. But what you guys always did, I thought, really well is, first, you know, you as a leader, you avoided kind of moralistic language, and I think that gets some people in trouble. We've seen a little bit of the Wall Street guys sort of acting like, well, if nobody else will save the planet, you know, I shall save the planet. And like, okay, that's bound to get people angry, when you're right, everything's shades of gray. And the other thing that I think a lot of folks didn't do, but they've often watched you and Chris and IBM, is you need a team in the room that thinks these things through. People were too reactive and just, you know, I saw a tweet or a headline and I'm going to respond. It's like, well, bring people of different backgrounds, different ideologies, different, you know, lived experiences, and really think this stuff through, so that ultimately, what it means, you're going to miss the Twitter storm, fine, but it means you're going to have a thought through response that's easier to defend and has you less out on a limb. So yeah, I think that's why you guys did it well.
Thank you, but that's also hard. And I do understand the pressure, like over the voting. Do you remember that decision?
Oh yeah,
colleagues that were right in the, you know, bullseye right away, and because of the speed now at which some of this flies, and I am empathetic to that. But by the way, guys, I do talk a lot of. I actually dedicated a chapter to this topic of one of the 5 principles was about stewarding good tech, and that everybody's a tech company now, and therefore these issues, especially with Chat GPT right now. I mean, I got asked a lot about that, and I'm very I'm more than concerned. I'm more prescriptive about it, because I felt like I learned so much. Can I branch on that 1 second, just on chat, just on I'm assuming almost everybody here listening to us today has probably tried it, right? I asked it, the first question I ask is, who's Mark Rometty? That's my husband. And it comes back and tells me everything he did to do a fine job running IBM. And I show it to my husband, and he's like, oh, I finally get the credit I deserve. And but okay, now look, I've been running it like 10 years. It was like not new news to chat, but wrong. So, but my big learning over our years with AI, and we started some of the hardest problems. We started with cancer and oncology, but this is very instructive, was it's all amounts, it's not tech issue. This is all about trust. And if you introduce these technologies and can build trust in them, and I think that's a big question mark right now, because chat is so authoritative, yet it can often be wrong. And it will be for a very long, still for a very long time. And so the idea of good tech is manage the up and the downside in parallel. So if you're going to put something out, and the CEO of it has said, hey, don't do anything important with this, but like no one's listening to him. It's already at 100 million people. And so, watermark, in fact, or something, and say, hey, been created with chat. Stupid apps that would have just been symbolically to come out and do things like, hey, this paper, 80% chance it was written with this way, because it is going to change a lot of things. But I just feel if we've got to be more thoughtful on its introduction, even though it's already the cat's out of the bag, so we're not going to stop it. But then things like precision regulation, Chris coined that term on our government team about, look, where should it be used? Where shouldn't it be used? Right? Kind of guardrails on these things. We just have a lot of work we should be doing, not just talking about on it. Because a lot of people, regulate us. I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to have happen? I mean, that's not very instructive. So what regulation would we do? And I would do some regulation around its use, not just the technology itself. I think it's good to not let certain countries have access to chips below 14 nanometers. That will allow them to run more of this. Okay. I mean, so there's a lot of real things we could do. I don't even know how I got on this topic, other than it's on my mind. And so it's just an example about how to work with government and be pragmatic. And one last thing I wanted to say about, many of you in DC. The other thing I felt I learned over the years was the one currency that was common in every country was jobs, in every lawmaker. That in most of what we do does center around eventually people and jobs at something, almost every darn one of us. And if you could stay on that, and I'll say, I always remember this conversation I had with Shimon Peres. It was like a 3-hour conversation late in his life. And he said many things I read about before. But one thing he said was, well, companies do more to develop countries than the country themselves and government, because they know no boundaries. And it's always like stuck with me, and it's so profound to me, because if I could, back to all the work Bruce and I did together, we could start from a place that we were common and what we, believed in, which was a better future. Because I am really worried for America and democracy that many people do not think they have a better future. And it's mathematically correct. So anyways, that was what I learned on that, working with government.
That's a pretty good segue, although I would note you're getting yourself in trouble. Somebody just nominated you to be the next Secretary of Commerce in the chat.
That's very funny. I'm happy to help. I'm helping. I have a call with Gina this weekend to help her. I'm happy to be a helper behind the scenes.
She is very well regarded.
She is a great believer of a lot of what we're talking about today.
So something you said though on the last conversation on sort of the ESG and all, which is a point you made, which is most of the initiatives that some people want to debate about at core are CEOs trying to help their business succeed more. And no better example of that for me than Skills First, because Skills First, this was not you long had this vision of my mom was a skills first person and I want to do that for other people. You figured that out kind of writing the book, but it's, you were looking to hire people. And you found that over credentialing meant that you were having trouble. There were people who could do the job, but the current hiring system was disqualifying them for what they lacked. If you tell the story of sort of how Skills First started, where it is now and where you see it going, I'll probably have one more question after that.
All right, this will be a good, for me, I feel as I would like to enlist you all in this movement in any business you run or any person you talk to. And it was, as you already heard the story of my mom. So I felt my mom, skills. I will fast forward to shorten it. 2012, looking for cyber people. They don't really exist in the marketplace. It's really a brand new big field. Walk into another meeting, serendipity, and it is corporate social responsibility. A poor school in Brooklyn, very bad neighborhood. We're working with a community college and them. We give them a curriculum, give them some internships, tell them to give them a chance at a job. And lo and behold, these couple kids, started doing pretty well. They got associate degrees. Next year, come back. I say, hey, how many did we hire? This is a good thing. Oh, 8. Or 3. I can't remember the number. It's like a teeny number. I was like, why? And they're like, well, 95% of our jobs require a PhD or not only an undergraduate degree, but from a fine institution. And I said, but these people seem to be doing quite well. And so it would begin with Chris and others on my team, a 15-year journey. And thank God I had an HR team that came to believe it. And we'd say, well, okay, we better go look at those job specs. Well, now remember, when you're our size, this is like a big number of them. This would be a 5-year journey of looking at them. And the first reaction of a workforce is, hey, you're dumbing us down, bringing in these people. And so we go study it, of course, engineers. We find, first year, they're a little less productive than you arrogant guys. After that, they're equal or better. And they take more education, more loyal, more retentive, and 75% went back and got degrees. Like, okay, what's wrong with this picture? And 95% Black and Hispanic, which I wanted a more inclusive workforce, which everyone says you can't find them. Oh, there they are, first generation. And I really became, as you can tell, a convert. And then every country in the world has the same problem. And I remember I can't remember who I asked. Chris, was you? I said, what percentage of people do not have a college degree in a developed nation? Okay, I wish I could have a poll here. 65%. I would see the murder of George Floyd. What percentage of Black Americans don't have a college degree? 80. Okay, what percentage of our jobs that are good, that could sustain a family of 4, 85% need a college degree? Well, we would then learn about half are over-credentialed. IBM went from 95% requiring to 50. Doesn't mean you don't eventually need one, or that you might, but where you start should not determine where you end. And I really, and then I again, just serendipity. I'm on a thing at MIT, Future of Work, and I look at real data, and it's showing this barbell effect in our country. The college grads over here are making lots of money. Everybody else is shifted down to the other end. There's no middle class left. I'm generalizing, but that's no middle class left. And down here, you're making less money, and you're like, I'm not sure democracy works for me. Let's vote for something else, or let's protest, or let's do something else here. This is why I think this is like a pragmatic way forward. You can't wait for everybody to go to college. I'm not against the American dream. I am a vice chair at Northwestern. I am all for it. That is not it. I was a great benefactor, but we don't have time. And so this would lead me down, and IBM down this journey, and great people. And now those little schools we were playing around with, and this is just one pathway. There's 300 in the world, 150,000 kids, 30 countries. And New York just approved another 35 million because these kids get associate degrees at the same time they're in high school as fast as they can. And you would be shocked at how many kids are coming out in 4 years with an associate degree and a high school degree. A little bit of a problem when you hire them and they're not 18 yet, but that's the different issue. So anyways, I'll stop. I feel that's what I work on now. And how it happened was on the sad murder of George Floyd. My great colleagues, as I said, where I started our talk, and we'll end there, Bruce, was they said, hey, we should do what business does best. Forget about tweeting and giving money. We should find jobs. But then it was like, great idea, but they didn't have the how. So today, Ken Frazier and I co-chair this group 110, 1 million Black employees in 10 years. I say he had the vision, he was with the what, and I am the how. Or he is the visionary and I'm the plumber of the team. Because I'm like, skills first is exactly the way to attack this. People like Walmart, fantastic progress. And lots of pathways, by the way. Apprenticeships, this country doesn't use enough apprenticeships. I don't know if it's been updated. Germany's 19 excess, Canada's 11 excess. This is crazy stuff. And with so many people are going to have to reskill now back to chat in the world of AI and all this stuff, man, we better all go back to school and be lifelong learners. And we will. And you could tweak. This is how Bruce and I, we met each other on Perkins Act, which took 7 years to get it fixed. Very simple point would be, if a community college gets funding, it should teach something that industry needs. I know that's a profound thought, but that was not how it was. They could just keep putting out cosmetologists and instead of what industry needed. And so like, that was a very basic, I mean, we can make all these little tweaks. We got a whole list of them that would really help the country. So we are going to keep going on that topic. Is that that's maybe a good, you're probably thinking, I didn't come here for this, but that's the power of us. Like, there's so many great companies, Delta, Cleveland Clinic, they're all working on this now. and they all have found the same. They're all living the same experience. So I'm just a little bit ahead of them on this.
Power of us, back on message. Well done. So I've got one more question for you, Ginny, although I'd ask maybe one of your former IBM colleagues or a lot of folks on, if somebody will put in the chat the link to the 110 website, so people who want to learn more and maybe even engage.
110.org. There you go. Thank you.
That was really fast.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you. So here's my last question, and actually it's almost going way back to I've got two kids, one in the workforce, about to have another child in the workforce, and a third who's in the middle of college. But a lot of folks in the younger generation, Generation Z or Alpha, sometimes talk about, I need to be able to bring my whole self to work. And I get, you obviously want to work for an employer you think has purpose, or that you feel willing to invest in. At the same time, I feel like Ginni Rometty wasn't about bringing her whole self to work. You were about bringing your best self to work. And while in a perfect world, your whole self is your best self, in reality, your best self has to be a lot more resilient to, the jackass client who says something that pisses you off, or to, something happening in the world, or your cat has a cold, or I don't know if you have advice or perspective. It feels to me that we want to make the world the best place we can, but you bring your best self to work and you kind of suck up stuff that's not perfect with the goal of getting there. But you're an employer. Is am I too old school here?
No, I think that's a great. If we all voted, I think there is true. I mean, Paul Pullman, maybe, did you have Paul come and talk about his book? Because he just did this survey, and it's like, what is Gen Z and millennial, and it was not millennial, Gen Z, and whatever the next one is,
Alpha,
looking for, and an authentic employer. They want them to be focused on, not just, it isn't like greater good that's not attached to the business. It's doing the business in that context of, solving big issues, is how I would put it. And that's what comes through, and focused on things like well-being. But that doesn't seem like odd to me. I think the reality is, as I say to people, look, you don't get to do that 100% of the day. Okay. I mean, if you can do 20%, like, that's a really good job, in that when you're focused on exactly what your main mission and purpose is, and you make that choice. And I think employers have to convince you that that is what they can offer you to do. Right. And you earn people staying. And so I don't think it's unrealistic for people to go look for that. And I'll end, because I end the book with a handwritten letter, which is kind of one of my signature things. I still handwrite notes. And I said that, on one hand, I talked very much about the very hard transition I had to, and what I learned from making that transition of IBM, which was behind and had to move to the future. But I end with, what will you be, remember what you might be remembered for. It just may be how you did your work, not what you did. And that is, to me, the purpose of good power. It's like, be careful. How you do it may matter just as much as what you actually achieved at the very end of the day. And to me, that's very germane in politics right now, that be careful. And that's how I feel about how I'd like to work for someone.
That's a perfect ending. I will not ruin it by anything other than thanking you. Ginni, thank you for spending your time with all of us.
And you guys, thank you for coming, by the way.
Send you a link, everybody. Sign up, because we already got them, so we don't want them in our closet. We want to send them to you.
Otherwise, I'll have to take them back from him. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
Ginni.